Washington is tightening its grip on global energy, giving orders on who can and can't buy oil from Russia. The message to allies is clear: follow US rules or face the consequences. But behind the loud talk about punishing Putin lies another story. America's own energy giants are struggling. Since Trump reignited the trade war, exports to China have collapsed from over $1 billion a month to zero. No coal, no crude, no LNG. Oversupply is pushing prices down, squeezing margins to the bone. Now Washington needs new buyers, and fast. That's why Japan, already battling an energy crisis, is suddenly in the spotlight. US officials are pressuring Tokyo to abandon Russian fuel, no matter the cost. But can Japan survive without it, or will Washington's gamble backfire and push another ally to the edge? For years, China was one of America's biggest energy customers. Every month, more than $1 billion worth of crude oil, coal, and LNG flowed from US ports to Chinese buyers. That trade helped balance global markets and kept prices stable. But after Trump reignited the tariff war, Beijing walked away completely. Today, Chinese imports of US energy stand at zero, not a single barrel, ton, or shipment. The result is a massive glut at home. American producers are now sitting on excess supply, pushing prices lower and shrinking already thin profit margins that average between 50 cents and $2 a barrel. OPEC's decision to keep pumping adds more pressure, while ongoing conflicts and slower global growth are eating into demand. To make matters worse, new Chinese levies have pushed freight costs for US crude shipments from the Gulf Coast to Asia up by more than 15%. For Asian buyers, it simply makes no sense to pay extra when cheaper oil from Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, or even Russia is available next door. This imbalance is now spreading through the entire US energy complex. Refiners are cutting output, storage tanks are filling up, and small producers are going bankrupt. Analysts are warning the pain could deepen. According to Bank of America, Brent crude could plunge below $50 a barrel if the US-China trade war escalates further. What started as a trade weapon is turning into a self-inflicted wound. Washington's attempt to isolate Beijing has backfired, flooding its own market with unsold oil and leaving American energy companies desperate for new buyers just as US allies are starting to turn away. Scott Bessent has turned up the heat on Tokyo. His message is simple: stop buying Russian oil and gas or face political consequences. But for Japan, that's an impossible demand. The country imports about 90% of its total energy, and nearly 9% of its LNG comes directly from Russia. Those shipments are locked in long-term contracts worth billions of dollars. Ending them early would trigger massive penalties and leave Japan scrambling to replace more than 6 million metric tons of LNG each year, a gap that cannot be filled overnight. Japan's power plants, factories, and even transport networks depend on steady fuel supplies. Without Russian energy, electricity costs would skyrocket, forcing industries like Toyota, Honda, and Nippon Steel to cut output or relocate production abroad. Domestic utilities are already under strain, with LNG spot prices in Asia hovering near $12 per million BTU, double the pre-war average. For households, that means higher bills. For exporters, it means thinner margins and weaker competitiveness. This kind of pressure isn't new. Washington is doing the same across the world. From the Netherlands, where US officials pushed ASML and Nexperia to block China's access to chip-making tools, to Japan, now being told to cut Russian fuel. And people are noticing. In a recent poll on our channel, 93% of viewers said the US will lose global trust because of these tactics. The numbers speak for themselves. Allies are beginning to see coercion, not partnership. Yet Washington continues to push. Bessent's message to Congress shocked even seasoned analysts. He wasn't just talking about diplomacy or sanctions. He was calling for something far more aggressive.
But 85 U.S. senators are willing to give President Trump the authority to put up to 500% tariffs on China for the purchase of Russian oil.
Did you hear that? 500% tariffs, not against Russia, but against anyone who dares to buy from Russia. The message to Japan is clear: fall in line or risk similar treatment. Officially, this campaign is framed as a stand against Putin. But it's not really about punishing Russia. It's about getting Japan to buy US energy during this crucial period. Washington wants to redirect global flows toward American exporters, and with LNG plants from Texas to Louisiana expanding capacity, Tokyo's dependence becomes an opportunity too big to ignore. But Japan is reaching its breaking point. Manufacturing PMI remains deep in contraction, industrial demand is falling, and inflation is already eroding household income. If Tokyo cuts Russian energy, the economic shock could tip the country into recession. Still, Bessent's pressure continues, a test of how far America can push an ally before loyalty turns into survival. Japan's industries are caught in a tightening vice. Rising energy prices and shrinking global demand are squeezing manufacturers that once powered the country's export miracle. For nearly 3 years, Japan's manufacturing PMI has stayed in contraction, signaling declining factory output and weaker new orders. Energy costs are a big part of the problem. With Russia's gas and oil largely off the table, Japanese companies are paying some of the highest prices in Asia. LNG spot rates hover around $12 per million BTU, while imported coal and oil have risen more than 20% compared to last year. At the same time, US tariffs of up to 20% are hitting Japan's key exports: cars, electronics, and industrial machinery, cutting into profits and eroding competitiveness abroad. Companies like Toyota and Honda face falling margins, while smaller suppliers struggle to keep production going. The weaker yen helps exports on paper, but inflation eats away any real benefit at home. This double squeeze, from expensive energy and closed markets, is pushing Japanese firms to make hard choices. Some are shifting operations to Southeast Asia, while others are quietly exploring investments in the United States, where energy is cheaper and trade barriers lower. Washington might call it reindustrialization, but for Japan, it feels like forced relocation. If Tokyo gives in to US pressure and abandons Russian fuel entirely, its factories could follow the same path as American farmers once did, moving production abroad just to survive. And while Japan struggles to keep its industries running, Europe faces a different kind of crisis, a storm of debt and political paralysis. Standard & Poor's recently cut France's credit rating from AA- to A+, warning that the country's finances are deteriorating faster than expected. France's debt now exceeds 114% of GDP, a level that puts it dangerously close to the red zone occupied by Italy and Greece. Servicing that mountain of debt already costs Paris around 67 billion euros a year, money that could have gone to industry, infrastructure, or energy subsidies. French bond yields have climbed to nearly 3.5%, while Germany's sight at about 2.6%, widening the gap between Europe's two largest economies. Investors are demanding higher returns to lend, fearing more political instability after Macron's government failed to secure a stable majority. A weaker France also means a weaker Eurozone, and with elections across Europe fueling populist spending promises, deficits are expanding everywhere. Brussels faces an impossible choice: enforce austerity and risk recession, or tolerate inflation to buy time. Either way, the pressure will ripple across the continent. Rising borrowing costs will squeeze smaller economies first, forcing new bailouts that strain the European Central Bank's limits. The EU's financial system is once again entering a familiar cycle: debt, downgrade, and denial. And this fiscal instability in Europe is a warning for Washington too, where record deficits and higher interest payments are setting the stage for a similar reckoning. As global markets stumble, Trump is promising what he calls a new golden age for America.
You know better than anybody else, $17 trillion. It could be $20 trillion by the end of the first year, my first year.
Investment in America.
Investing in America, $20 trillion. No country's ever done anywhere even near that, like a fraction of that. Biden did less than $1 trillion in 4 years. I did 20 trillion. We're going to do over 17 trillion in 8 months.
17 trillion in 8 months. That's not a plan. It's a promise built on hope. But Washington is already drowning in record debt. The more it borrows to chase that vision, the closer it gets to an economic cliff. Federal debt has already crossed $37 trillion, and interest payments are expected to surpass $1.2 trillion annually, more than the entire defense budget. Manufacturing output is slowing, investment confidence is shaky, and foreign buyers are quietly retreating from U.S. treasuries. The promise of massive new investment sounds less like a plan and more like a desperate attempt to project strength in the middle of an unfolding financial storm. At the same time, Washington is racing to rebuild supply chains it abandoned decades ago. Trump wants to revive domestic manufacturing, but the critical materials needed for that, from rare earths to battery metals, are still dominated by China. His call to invest in America is colliding with the harsh reality of resource dependence. And that's where the next battle begins. Behind Trump's trillion-dollar optimism lies a scramble to secure the materials that make modern industry possible. From chips and defense systems to electric vehicles, everything depends on minerals the U.S. no longer controls. And China knows it. China now dominates the global rare earth market. These minerals may be invisible to most people, yet they power everything, from electric vehicles and wind turbines to smartphones and advanced weapons. Over the past 2 decades, Beijing has built a complete supply chain around them, turning rare earths into one of its most powerful economic tools. To counter this, Washington is turning toward Australia, hoping to build an alternative supply network that can reduce dependence on China. Trump has already signaled plans to invest heavily in Australian mining projects, positioning the U.S. government to act almost like a sovereign wealth fund. But Australia's role in this market is small. It accounts for only about 4% of global rare earth mining, while China controls around 60% of total mine output. And the real advantage isn't just in the ground, it's in the refining. Nearly 91% of global rare earth processing capacity is located inside China. So even Australia's ore ends up being shipped to Chinese refineries for final production. That concentration gives Beijing control over the materials that keep modern industry running. In other words, China now sits at the very heart of the world's industrial chain, able to influence prices, restrict exports, and decide who gets access to critical inputs. Recent export data proves how firm that grip has become. In September, China cut rare earth shipments by roughly 1,000 tons compared with August, sending global prices soaring. Metals like dysprosium, terbium, and scandium, essential for EV motors, magnets, and semiconductors, remain almost entirely in Chinese hands. Washington's effort to catch up will take years and cost billions. Mining new deposits is slow. Mastering the toxic and complex refining process is even harder. Even if construction began tomorrow, China would still control the bottleneck. Its efficiency, technical expertise, and willingness to handle environmental costs keep the rest of the world dependent. And that dependency now shapes every trade and geopolitical decision Washington makes. Global power today is defined by endurance, not strength. U.S. tariffs have created an energy glut. Japan faces mounting pressure from Washington, Europe is sinking under debt, and China holds the ultimate leverage. Every path leads to inflation. Governments will choose it over collapse. Beijing can wait. Washington must spend. Allies like Japan and Europe now stand at the breaking point, torn between loyalty and survival. The world's balance is shifting, quietly but decisively. So will Japan obey U.S. orders? Or will China and Russia quietly win by patience alone? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next one.